And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. I'm really excited about today's guest. And normally I skim through the bios, but I want to give you some of the depth of Niko Kanner's bio. So Niko is the founder of Incandescent. He founded that in 2013. His work spans the firm's three major areas of service, serving as a thought partner to leaders of large enterprises on strategy, organization, and innovation, advising founders on the development of their ventures, and partnering with foundations on nonprofits engaged in systems change. Now, prior to that, Niko was the co-founder and managing partner of the consulting firm Katzenbach, which was ultimately swallowed up by Booz. So he was a senior partner at Booz. He was a member of the management committee of Bridgewater Associates. He was named one of the 10 new gurus by Fortune magazine in 2008. Remember when guru was a thing that we took
back then?
Back then, that was like a cool thing to be. And he's been the top 25 in Consulting magazine. Where else do we go? Harvard, McKinsey, blah, 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 The usual stuff. Yeah. So another underachiever comes on the show. So Niko, welcome. We've been in each other's orbits for like 15 years, and here we are.
A very long time. Glad
very
to be
long time.
Really looking forward to the conversation.
So here's what I was thinking about for today. So you've got this, I can't think of too many people on the planet that have the view or the perspective that you do relative to the connection between thought leadership and developing thought leadership or derivatives of it into consulting and then scaling the heck out of that. That's a technical term. So give a little bit of background on, whether it's from Goldsmith Partners, Katzenbach, et cetera, just sort of how that's unfolded for you.
So in terms of how people do that successfully in the world, there are kind of two roads. One road is productization and intense specialization. Mm-hmm. You are trying to develop an idea that becomes the currency, the standard in a particular domain. And somebody who I see taking that path beautifully in our mutual circle is Leo Tillman, where the ideas that he and General Charles Jacobi have written about regarding agility are really decisively differentiated in terms of that intersection of a field of risk management that's become sterile and the more dynamic organizational approach to what does it really take to be insulated against the kinds of risks that enterprises face.
So stay with this idea piece for a minute, because I want to unpack that. So a belief, a pretty popular belief, not that it's right or wrong, is, hey, if I'm a consultant, there's lots of things I've got to be able to do for lots of people to serve my clients, strategy and implementation, et cetera. And I think what you hit on the head is the real issue. In order to, listen, you could be a great consultant and support your clients in lots and lots of different ways. But it's that distilling it down to that one idea, whether it's agility, innovation, creativity. I mean, there's universe of ideas. What is the one piece that you're adding to the conversation, to the literature, to the methodologies, if you will, that's a game changer?
Yeah, so I think that's a beautiful statement of sort of the first of these two roads. And say 98% of success in thought leadership is along that first road. And then there's a second road, which is a more generalist positioning, which can embody thought leadership in a range of different topics that can be combined and recombined to solve a lot of different kinds of problems in the world. And for most of my career, I've been taking the difficult path of trying to be at least partway on the second road. And one of the things that I think I can share that may be of sort of greatest interest to your audience of people who are concerned with both the craft and the business of thought leadership was how that played out for us at Katzenbach.
Yeah, that'd be great. So actually give the backstory, because I'm fluent in Katzenbachese, if that's a thing. But yeah, give a little bit of the history lesson there, because it's a phenomenal case study.
So three of us, John Katzenbach, Mark Feigen, and myself, founded the firm in 1998. We'd all come out of McKinsey, Katz, as we call him, who turns 89 today.
Oh, happy birthday.
McKinsey's mandatory retirement age. And
which is obviously 88.
In fact, not only was he nowhere near ready to retire then, he is still not retired at 89. He is still active in the world of PwC 2 acquisitions later. And the three of us started building from the ground floor of a brownstone of 37th Street and on upward, a firm at the intersection of organization and strategy, which was in some ways a generalist firm. We serve companies in a lot of different industries, and problems that we solved for those companies ended up spanning a pretty wide range.
But let me just sort of throw in there, 3 dudes from McKinsey starting a firm. That's not a unique story.
Yeah,
that happens almost on a monthly basis, right? McKinsey, Deloitte, whatever. 3 buddies get together and say, let's throw our name or something on the door, and voila, here we are. But this is a different story.
And so for all the firm's success, and we self-funded, completely organic, we dropped from the 3 of us to about 150 people and ended up selling. We were the first acquisition of Booz & Company in 2009 after Booz & Company became independent following the Carlyle purchase of Booz Allen Hamilton. And along that path, for all the success that we were having out in the market, kept getting stuck on branding. Like, we were finding it very difficult to describe to the market what it was that we did in a way that would be sort of concise and immediately resonant.
So let me pause you there. By the way, this is a problem that we work with thought leaders almost on a daily basis. Like, what are the problems I solve? Why am I best qualified to solve this problem? Who are my best target avatars, et cetera? This to me is a fundamental issue that really, really smart people struggle with for a lot of time.
Yeah. And so we could have been your poster child around struggling. And we would fight about it internally as well. And when we finally made progress, which was probably 6 years into the 10-year arc of building this firm, was when we recognized why we kept getting stuck on the branding issue, which was that there were 2 truths. Truth number 1, which relates to your non-newsworthiness of 3 guys from McKinsey, is that when we were entering new relationships, almost always, when we were, particularly in the largest companies, as we were building relationships with clients like a Unilever or a Microsoft or a Shell, almost always it was because they saw us as doing some very particular thing that had relevance to them that the generalist firms did not do and were not focused on. And so that could be working on top leadership team effectiveness in a way that was tied to the substantive agenda of that team at the top versus team building in the trust falls and ropes courses sense. Or it could be...
You basically found openings in the things that needs weren't being met at par. And you found your openings.
So that was the first truth. The second truth was that the vast majority of the money that we made was getting inside certain large companies and then solving a wide range of problems, most of which McKinsey, BCG, and others also solved.
Right, but now you're punching far above your weight. So even at 150 people, I mean, that's, Accenture has more of that in one office in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a whole bunch of things that probably shouldn't be the topic for today about how we're able to punch above the weight, which related more to talent and the process. The stuckness on branding came from, if we described ourselves as though we were only specialists in the things that Microsoft, Shell, and Unilever saw as, we would never go to McKinsey for that. We would be creating cognitive dissonance around the 100 other things that we were doing for Pfizer. Right. If we described ourselves in a more generalist way that would more accurately describe who we were to the clients that were the largest anchors, it would seem hopelessly undifferentiated when we went to the.
Yeah, so this is the Goldilocks problem, right? Exactly. So it's a total Goldilocks problem of consulting.
And so we needed to embrace both truths in order to brand ourselves well, and to have a few words, and the words that we ended up choosing were breakthrough organizational performance, that could be used in two different ways. When we went to a new client, we used it as almost like a marker of a content area. And we would talk about the pretty hyper specialized things. We'd be like a Leo Tillman, sort of saying, here are the things we're thinking about that nobody else is thinking about. And we would describe what I was gesturing at as that first road. And then when we described ourselves in the context of a larger relationship, we would use those same three words, breakthrough organizational performance, as more like a modifier, a way of talking about what was differentiated about our approach to a set of issues that others might also be focused upon.
So our language might be different, but you and I, sometimes it feels like share a brain, or it leads up to a greater brain. In my world, I call that the platform, right? So breakthrough organizational performance, could it be a book title? Yeah, could be a book title. Could it be it wouldn't be the name of the firm, but the solve for X is Niko, or in this case, Katzenbach and Partners at the time. They're the X guys. What is X? I call it, sort of solve for X. They're the breakthrough organizational performance guys, right? And they do that thing better than anybody. In fact, they invented that. And by the way, that could also be expanded to the generalist without disqualifying 60% of the market, and really narrowed down to team leadership effectiveness. So there's an aperture, on that lens, which is beautiful. Yeah.
So we learned slowly and painfully in ways that maybe the Peter Winnick of then, and certainly the Peter Winnick of now, could have taught us faster and more directly the art of what you describe as platform, and in particular, how to apply that art when you have a business system that demands that you be both the specialist and the generalist.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. Right. No, it's not easy to do. Now, not everybody has the specialist generalist problem, but we all have the problem of, how do I show the world that I'm so different than everybody else? Because, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And ultimately everything starts to sound like the voice from the teacher at the Peanuts, on the Peanuts cartoon. And you've got to sort of wake people up and have the courage to put a stake in the ground and say, we do this better than anybody else. Yeah, there's a bunch of other things we can do, but this is our jam. This is our flag on the ground.
Yeah. And part of the challenge there is like finding the right level of abstraction.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Back when I was growing up, I used to read these fantasy novels by an author named Piers Anthony, set in a world called Xanth. And in the world of Xanth, everybody had one magical power. And that magical power might be a small arbitrary thing, like you can turn things that are red into green things, or it could be something of great generality, like you can change your shape into anything. And the more general the spell, the more powerful it was.
Sure.
I think a challenge that thought leaders have is sort of figuring out how to describe the spell. And if you try to describe it as something that is too general, it becomes denatured unless what you have is truly so powerful to solve a wide range of problems. Try to describe it in ways that are over-specific. The relevance is too low. And finding the right sort of sweet spot in between that will be very different for different people. But with Leo, like the example of agility is something much more general than enterprise risk management as a technical process. But at the same time, it isn't everything. It is a particular aspect of how the world requires organizations to perform.
Exactly. I want to fast forward the story a little bit to now it's several years later, and Booz comes and acquires Katzenbach. And without getting into the details of the financials, what I want to talk about is when you're in the process of being acquired, or even to be considered, certain things need to be true, right? So some of it is the things that can make a small boutique 10, 20 person shop successful would kill a deal, right? Like it's all based on the charisma of one partner. All
Yeah.
the deals come in because one partner's got a great, his brother-in-law is on the board of GM, or there is no methodology, but somehow they plow through it. So give me sort of the do's and don'ts of what to do in order to actually have a self-sustaining enterprise. Because as smart as you and your partners were, it wasn't all based on three brains. You had 150 people. You had a big operation.
Yeah. So let me focus on two specific aspects of that deal that I think have more generalizability and could be useful to others.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
One, which I think a lot of thought leaders underappreciate the importance of, is there was already a relationship. So we had served Booz Allen Hamilton as client, and that meant we really knew well the leadership of what became Booz and Company, and began. We didn't actually do the transaction until almost a year later, but we began a conversation about the possibility while Booz and Company was still being formed. And I think it is important for thought leaders who are imagining an eventual transaction to begin cultivating the relationships with people who might be buyers way earlier than they're ready to do a deal. The second,
way earlier, like years earlier, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The second, which I think is especially relevant to your domain, Peter, connects to thought leadership, which is that the transaction was deeply relevant to Booz and Company's core idea and core story to the world. So when Booz and Company was stood up as an independent firm, they were going to the market with a description of their view on strategy, which was capabilities-driven strategy.
Right. So they have their own proprietary recipe on what strategy development means at Booz. And by the way, if you don't like that, don't work with us. But this is our way,
yeah,
and that
this is our point of view, which was really powerful for a firm that had been in the BAH days much more balkanized, and there were a whole lot of different ways of talking about strategy. It was a real accomplishment for them to be able to knit together that platform. They didn't have the strength in certain areas of organization that story demanded. If you're going to say to the world, we are about capabilities-driven strategy, but you'd really better be good at some things relating to, for instance, culture.
Right.
And
you can't phone that piece in.
Organization design to the shaping of strategy. And that's really what we built our firm around. So our platform around breakthrough organizational performance was like one of the handful of proof points that you would want for the Booz and Company platform. And so there was this sort of immediate resonance about what we were saying to the world. And that was important to our own people as well, because we had to tell the story to these incredibly talented people who could be working anywhere about why follow us. And most of those people were not shareholders.
So I want to just emphasize what you said, and maybe more importantly, what you didn't say. You actually talked about the strategic intellectual property fit into their narrative. You didn't say, well, we had 20 diamond accounts and we had this revenue at multiple and they can sell more stuff into our clients. Like none of that. Like, so and not that any those things aren't important, but the headline was the strategic fit they had an IP gap. They had an IP gap that you fit naturally. Exactly. Then I would imagine all those other things we're obviously going to look at from a valuation perspective, they'll come to be. And I think most people think about it the other way.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. Those things were second order things because you cannot succeed at the business that Booz and Company was in without being able to get new clients. Like you don't have to go buy a boutique firm to get new clients. Of course, there was some relevance that we had certain relationships that could deepen their relationships or with companies that weren't serving yet. That was nice, but that wasn't the center
wasn't justification. Yeah.
action, the center of the action was that there was not only IP, but deeply embodied know-how that was central to the story they were telling the world. And then the question we all had to answer was, and could these things be brought together? And there was a question of culture fit and style fit, which we all knew to be there because we, in fact, worked on these questions with them.
And I would say, and they with you, they also got a sense not just of your IP, but what better way for them to know you than to be a client and say, who do you stand for? Do you live up to your promises? Do you delivering value? What is it actually like to work with them? Would we be proud to put that in front of, to put that in front of our clients? Like, that's a really phenomenal way from a reciprocal standpoint to sort of date before you get married.
Yeah. And it created a level of trust that while we were still negotiating the final elements of the deal, an opportunity came up that was really the kind of flagship demonstration case of what the two firms could do together, which was General Motors, before they even emerged from bankruptcy, saying we really need to transform our operating model and our culture. And we went together to,
and won the deal.
At the time was the CEO of GM, and said, this work with you would be the core kind of demonstration of why our two firms are coming together. And when he said yes, John Katzenbach and I made it our number one priority during those incredibly demanding months of finishing the deal. We're integrating the firms to be out in the market, showing that the linkage of capability-driven strategy and breakthrough organizational performance was powerful in the context of one of the central stories of business at that particular moment.
Yeah. And there's an internal piece to that. So the external piece is, yes, that becomes an amazing case study to tell the world in the future. But there's also an internal piece, meaning I would imagine, like any other change management initiative or integration or whatever, there's a bunch of the consultants sitting back at booths going, maybe, I don't want to be the first one in the pool. I have no reason to not like them, but why do I want to risk blah, 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 with my clients? And then they see that and they're like, holy cow, I want some of that. When can I bring that to my clients? So I just want to be mindful of the time here. This has been phenomenal. You and I can talk for hours, as we talked about a little bit earlier, but I so much appreciate the insight and the sharing of the story and the narrative and the pros and the cons. There's so much richness in the sharing of that I appreciate it.
Part of what's such a pleasure about this conversation is the way in which your work points to how these lessons from experience, which I'm sharing, are just instances of some very general principles of how thought leadership is built and brought into the world. And I feel like your way of explicating what I've lived really brings out how there are only a certain number of problems in thought leadership, and having the concepts that you describe and the practices are essential to not having to go through the wilderness of the several years to get to breakthrough organizational performance.
No, and I think you're 100% right, because from my seat, I see so many amazing ideas every year, right? And like the sad thing, so that's an amazing thing, right? The sad thing is so many of them never really see the light of day or reach a percentage of their potential for lots of other reasons that you had mentioned. So it's not just the strength of the idea. That's table stakes. Do you have to be smart? Do you have to have something to say? Do you have to have a proven method? Of course you do, right? But once again, table stakes. If you don't have those other things going on as well, you're not going to reach the impact or the financial side that some of the work has the potential to reach. So again, thank you so much for your time, Niko. This has been fantastic. We'll have to do this again real soon.
It's a pleasure, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.